There's a certain silence that only follows laughter, the kind that feels heavier than the joke that caused it. For Rick Sanchez, that silence is home. He's a man who built universes, rewritten physics, conquered gods, and yet finds his greatest comfort in the hollow echo that comes after the punchline. His life, at its core, is an ongoing performance, a show for no one, where the act of mocking existence becomes the only way to survive it. The laughter is never joy, it's anesthesia, a way to dull the unbearable sharpness of knowing too much. Rick's genius isn't just intelligence, it's a kind of cosmic awareness that corrodes certainty. He doesn't see possibilities, he sees inevitabilities. Every timeline, every permutation, every consequence. To him, the multiverse isn't vast, it's claustrophobic. Every possible version of himself, every possible outcome, all already played out somewhere. When you know that, choice becomes illusion, freedom becomes noise. And in that noise, Rick builds machines not to explore, but to forget. Each portal isn't an escape from the world, it's an escape from himself. In his garage, surrounded by empty bottles and discarded inventions, Rick becomes both creator and observer. He dissects, meaning the way a scientist dissects a corpse, not to revive it, but to prove it's dead. There's a cruel kind of beauty in that. He's the man who laughs at the absurdity of life, not because it's funny, but because it's the only sound that keeps the void from speaking back. The infinite joke of his existence isn't that nothing matters. It's that he can't stop caring, even though he wishes he could. For all his arrogance, Rick's awareness is profoundly lonely. Every time he ridicules others for seeking meaning, love, family, morality, he's really mocking the ghost of himself that still believes in those things. The drunk genius who belches through sarcasm isn't a nihilist, he's a believer who's been betrayed by belief. The very act of rejecting meaning is paradoxically proof that he once needed it. His cynicism isn't defense, it's evidence of past tenderness. The kind that once hoped the universe might be capable of mercy. There's a scene that plays out endlessly across dimensions. Rick standing in a room, holding a drink, pretending he's the smartest man in the universe. Everyone laughs, everyone fears him, but beneath that spectacle is a simple truth. Intelligence has never protected him from despair. If anything, it made him more fluent in it. The smarter he became, the more he understood the architecture of suffering. He learned how life replicates pain, how consciousness amplifies it, how love, when examined too closely, dissolves into biology and projection. And yet, he can't let go. He keeps reaching for connection, even as he dismantles its meaning. That's the contradiction that defines him. He builds walls to keep people out, but every invention is secretly a door. Every cruel word hides a confession. His humour, abrasive and relentless, is both shield and signal. He mocks what he misses. He deconstructs what he desires. For Rick, irony is survival, a constant translation of pain into intellect. When he says nothing matters, what he really means is, I wish I could believe something still does. But Rick's tragedy isn't just philosophical, it's personal. Beneath the cosmic detachment lies a human wound, the loss that set everything in motion. Whether it's the death of his wife, the failure of a family, or the unbearable burden of remembering every version of that loss across infinite realities, the result is the same. A man who knows too much to heal. Grief repeats itself in him, like a glitch in the code. Each universe offers another chance, another variation, another family, and yet none of them feel authentic, because he knows how replaceable they are. That's the cruel paradox of the multiverse, when everything can. exist, nothing feels real. And so Rick laughs, loudly, constantly, destructively. The laughter becomes a philosophy, a way to stay afloat in a sea of absurdity. If everything is a joke, then nothing can truly hurt you. If the punchline never ends, you never have to sit in silence. But the truth he can't escape is that laughter is temporary. It fades, and when it does, all that's left is the sound of his own breathing, proof that he's still here, still conscious, still unable to stop caring. What makes Rick fascinating isn't his intellect, but his contradiction. He's a god who craves forgiveness, a man who denies morality but lives in guilt. He claims to understand the machinery of everything, yet can't understand why he's still unhappy. Knowledge, for him, isn't liberation, it's confinement. He knows too much to believe in lies, but not enough to find peace in truth. He's trapped between infinite worlds and a single wound. In quieter moments, when the sarcasm fades and the drink runs out, Rick's mind returns to the same question. If everything is meaningless, why does it hurt so much to lose? Why do the echoes of love still ache in a universe without purpose? He can't answer that, and that inability is the one thing that keeps him human. His intelligence can break atoms, but it can't dissolve longing. Beneath all his nihilism is a man who feels too deeply, who hides emotion beneath equations, and who mistakes avoidance for wisdom. There's a strange tenderness in how Rick moves through existence. Every destruction he causes, every universe he ruins, carries a trace of guilt. He sabotages happiness before it can betray him. He leaves before he's left. He laughs before he can cry. It's a pattern as old as self-awareness. When pain becomes predictable, you start writing it yourself just to stay in control. Rick's chaos isn't random, it's ritual. A way to prove he's still the author of his suffering. His relationship with Morty reveals this best. Morty represents what Rick has lost: innocence, curiosity, the ability to hope without irony. Rick needs him, not as an assistant, but as a witness, someone who still believes, so Rick doesn't have to. Each adventure becomes a test. Can the universe break Morty too? Can cynicism be taught? But deep down, Rick doesn't want Morty to become him. Every time Morty resists despair, every time he chooses compassion, it's both infuriating and healing for Rick. It reminds him that maybe, somewhere in the noise, a different kind of intelligence exists, one that doesn't need to mock everything to survive. And yet, Rick can't surrender to that softness. To him, vulnerability equals annihilation. Every time he opens up, the void rushes in. Every time he loves, he loses control. So he keeps his emotions under glass, preserved but unreachable. His family sees fragments, the occasional apology, the flash of affection, but Rick always retreats before it becomes real. It's not cruelty, it's fear. He's terrified of needing something in a universe that takes everything. That fear is what keeps him alive. The man who claims to have conquered death still flinches at the idea of being truly seen. Because to be seen means being accountable, and Rick's greatest terror isn't punishment, it's meaning. If something matters, then he's responsible for what he's done. His nihilism is a disguise for guilt. His intelligence, a wall against intimacy. The smartest man in the universe built his genius not to understand everything, but to make sure nothing could understand him. And yet, beneath all that armor, there's still a flicker of hope, a strange, stubborn spark that refuses to die. You can see it in the way he hesitates before destroying a world, or the way his voice softens when Morty says something kind. It's the quiet part of him that still believes in redemption, even if he can't admit it. Rick's tragedy is that he sees too clearly to be delusional, but not clearly enough to forgive himself. The infinite joke, then, isn't that life has no meaning. It's that meaning keeps trying to reach him, even as he laughs it away. Every act of destruction is a plea for connection. Every insult hides affection. Every portal opens not to another world, but to another failed attempt at peace. The multiverse keeps expanding, but Rick's loneliness remains constant. He's infinite and incomplete, omniscient and broken, a god haunted by the knowledge that no amount of understanding can replace love. At night, when the lab lights flicker and the universe hums like an old machine, Rick sometimes lets the mask slip. He looks at the empty flask in his hand and wonders if maybe the joke isn't on the universe after all. Maybe it's on him, for thinking he could laugh his way out of grief. The stars outside his window aren't beautiful. They're reminders of everything he can't fix. Every light is a life he could have touched differently. Every planet is a version of himself that made another choice. He could visit them all, and still, he'd never find peace. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the meaning he rejects is the very thing he's living. The endless struggle between despair and defiance. Every day, he wakes up, picks up a drink, and chooses to keep existing, despite knowing exactly how pointless it is. That choice, small and absurd as it is, becomes his quiet act of rebellion. In a universe where nothing matters, persistence itself is sacred. The laughter may be hollow, but it's still a sound against the silence. Rick Sanchez isn't a philosopher because he has answers. He's one because he never stops asking questions. His pain is inquiry, his chaos, contemplation, and his laughter, the echo of a mind that refuses to surrender completely to the void. He is the infinite joke, not because he mocks existence, but because he embodies it. Tragic, brilliant, lonely, still, searching for something real in a sea of endless versions. When he finally passes out in his chair, surrounded by tools, wires, and the faint smell of burning circuits, there's a moment before sleep when his face softens. For just an instant, he looks peaceful, like a man who has stopped fighting reality long enough to rest inside it. The multiverse keeps spinning. Universes collide, timelines fracture, and somewhere, deep inside that noise, Rick Sanchez dreams not of control, but of quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't follow laughter, but replaces it. That's the heart of his philosophy, that maybe the joke isn't to laugh at everything, but to keep going until the laughter turns into understanding. Genius, for most people, is a light, a way to illuminate the unknown. For Rick Sanchez, it's a gravity. It pulls everything toward it, crushing wonder beneath comprehension. From the moment he began to understand how things worked, the universe stopped being magic and became machinery. Every star became a chemical reaction, every emotion a neural pattern, every god a glorified equation. And when you see the gears behind everything, it's hard to love the clock. Rick doesn't live in awe. He lives in aftermath, the quiet place where knowing replaces feeling. His mind, sharper than any scalpel, dissects reality until nothing remains but function. He builds miracles daily, portals, clones, sentient life, yet feels nothing when they work. Creation for him isn't joy, it's compulsion. He doesn't invent to explore, but to fill the silence left by what understanding destroyed. Genius became his curse, the moment it became effortless. Every problem he solves only deepens his despair, because the solution always reveals how small the problem really was. The more he learns, the less there is left to wonder about, and, without wonder, existence loses colour. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being unable to be surprised. Rick lives there. The world for him is predictable. People are patterns, and the only variable he can't calculate is himself. That's the paradox that eats him alive. He can model galaxies, but can't model why he keeps sabotaging his own happiness. His intelligence lets him understand the physics of any universe, but not the architecture of peace. He's trapped inside a mind that can't stop running, a brain that never sleeps, never forgives, never shuts up. His genius isolates him from others, not because they're stupid, but because they still believe in things he can't. Morty still believes in friendship, in decency, in the possibility that love means something, even if it doesn't last. Summer still believes that rebellion can change something. Beth still believes that being needed is the same as being loved. Rick, meanwhile, sees all of it as circuitry, loops of behavior coded by biology and fear. He sees people not as mysteries, but as predictable algorithms that lie to themselves beautifully. And even though he knows he should envy their delusion, he can't. He's too far gone. That distance from the ordinary kills him in small, invisible ways. Every conversation feels like translation, a genius trying to speak the language of emotion with broken syntax. When people talk about dreams, he hears data. When they talk about faith, he hears control. When they talk about love, he hears chemistry. His intelligence strips meaning from everything it touches, and yet he still longs for meaning. That's the unbearable tension at the center of his life. He wants to feel something that his own mind keeps explaining away. In another version of the universe, Rick could have been a bit savior. His inventions could have healed worlds, ended wars, created harmony. But genius without empathy always tilts toward entropy. He knows how to fix everything except himself, and because of that, he doesn't fix anything at all. Every time he could use his intellect to help, he recoils, mocking the idea of altruism as naive. But the truth is simpler and sadder. He's terrified that if he saves something, it might remind him that he still cares. And caring, for Rick, is unbearable. It means exposure. It means loss. It means weakness. The weight of genius is not the knowledge itself, it's the inability to forget it. Rick's brain doesn't rest. Even when he drinks, even when he sleeps, it keeps calculating, solving, remembering. Every universe he's destroyed, every person he's lost, every version of himself that failed, they all live inside him simultaneously. He carries infinite timelines in his head, all screaming for closure he'll never get. The irony is that his intelligence, the thing that was supposed to set him free, became his prison. He can't escape his own awareness. He often tells Morty that nothing matters, that the universe is chaos, that no one is special. But that's projection. It's easier to call the universe meaningless than to admit you can't find your own meaning in it. Rick's nihilism is self-defense disguised as philosophy. If he can convince himself that nothing matters, then the pain of failure, of guilt, of loss, all of it becomes manageable. It's not that he doesn't believe in meaning, it's that he's too intelligent to believe it's permanent, and permanence is what he craves. Sometimes, in the rare quiet of his lab, he stares at the equations sprawled across the walls and feels something close to resentment. Not for the universe, for his own brain, for giving him the ability to see everything but the capacity to enjoy any of it. There are moments when he catches a glimpse of beauty, the hum of a cosmic current, the shimmer of plasma folding over itself, and for a second he feels awe. Then the equation forms in his mind, explaining the phenomenon, and the awe evaporates. Genius is anti-mystery, and Rick's tragedy is that he's allergic to mystery but starving for it. There's another kind of weight in his genius, the moral kind. Rick knows the cost of every action before he takes it. When he destroys, he understands exactly how much life he erases. When he manipulates, he knows precisely how much it will hurt, and he does it anyway. Because to stop and feel that cost would paralyze him. His intelligence turns ethics into statistics. He can't afford to feel every consequence, not when there are infinite ones. So he compartmentalizes, turning guilt into logic, remorse into irony. He hides from morality behind the excuse of knowledge, and yet knowledge can't numb him completely. It leaks through the cracks. A glance at Morty's disappointment, a quiet moment of Beth's sadness, those things get through. He feels them, even if he won't admit it. His mind might be a fortress, but his heart still remembers warmth, even if it no longer believes in it. That memory of feeling becomes both poison and compass. It's what keeps him alive, even when he insists life isn't worth living. What's most haunting about Rick's genius is that it has no destination. He doesn't build toward anything. He builds away from things, away from boredom, away from grief, away from himself. His intellect functions like an escape pod, but he never lands anywhere. Every universe is another failed attempt at permanence. Every invention is a mirror that reflects his own emptiness. The man who could do anything chooses to do nothing that lasts, because permanence requires vulnerability. It requires staying, and staying terrifies him more than dying. There are flashes, though, moments when his genius touches something resembling transcendence, when he merges with alien consciousness, when he glimpses higher dimensions, when he stands outside time and sees everything at once. Those moments should bring enlightenment, but they only deepen his exhaustion. The more he sees, the more he realizes how finite his own soul feels against the infinite. Genius promised him godhood, but all it gave him was a front-row seat to futility. In a way, Rick's intelligence mirrors the human condition itself, the endless pursuit of understanding that only leads to more questions. He's the embodiment of humanity's greatest paradox, that progress and despair grow from the same soil. His science is our philosophy exaggerated, the dream that knowledge will make us free, and the fear that it only makes us aware of how trapped we truly are. The weight of genius isn't carried in his hands or his machines. It's carried in his silences. The moments after he finishes an invention, before he destroys it out of boredom. The spaces between his words when someone tells him they love him and he can't say it back. The quiet after laughter, the stillness after chaos. That's where the burden lives. Not in the explosions, not in the equations, but in the pauses he can't fill. And yet, even with that weight pressing on him, Rick never stops creating. That's the strange mercy of genius. It compels motion, even when meaning disappears. His inventions become confessions he can't speak. Each one a fragment of something he can't articulate. Guilt, hope, nostalgia, despair. The portal gun isn't just technology, it's longing made mechanical. His genius allows him to touch infinity, but never to hold it. And still, he keeps reaching, because maybe that's what genius really is. The endless refusal to stop searching for something you already know doesn't exist. At the heart of all this brilliance and bitterness lies a quiet truth. Rick doesn't hate the universe. He hates that it doesn't hate him back. He wants resistance, consequence, meaning. He wants something big enough to push against his intellect. But the universe doesn't care. It doesn't notice him. It doesn't need him. And that indifference terrifies him more than death. For all his mocking of gods and morals, Rick's greatest fear is that no one and nothing is watching. When he drinks himself to sleep, his mind doesn't rest. It drifts through unfinished equations and half-remembered dreams of family. Somewhere in the blur, he imagines a version of himself who wasn't cursed by understanding, someone who could look at a sunrise without calculating its wavelength, someone who could love without predicting the heartbreak. That version will never exist, but the longing for it keeps him alive. It's the small, irrational part of him that genius couldn't kill, the part that still wants to believe that something beautiful can exist without needing to be explained. That's the quiet irony at the center of Rick's genius. He's not trying to understand the universe. He's trying to find one thing his mind can't. Something that resists dissection. Something that stays mysterious even under the microscope. Maybe that's why he keeps living. Not because he expects to find it, but because not finding it means there's still something left to look for. The weight of genius isn't that it makes you powerful, it's that it makes you restless. It fills you with the unbearable need to know, and the unbearable sadness of realizing that knowing never satisfies. For Rick, that's not a lesson, it's a condition, one that he'll carry until the end of every timeline, until even his mind grows tired of thinking. And when that day comes, when the equations finally quiet and the bottles stop clinking, maybe he'll understand what all his genius was trying to tell him, that some things are meant to be felt, not solved. Connection should be simple. It should be the thread that keeps beings tethered to something larger than themselves. A look, a laugh, a moment of quiet understanding. But for Rick Sanchez, connection is a paradox he can never solve. It terrifies him because it asks for vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one state he can't quantify, can't control. Every connection he's ever made has ended in loss, betrayal, or the suffocating weight of responsibility. To connect is to need, and to need is to risk, and for Rick, risk has always meant pain. So he chooses distance, an endless, aching distance disguised as freedom. To understand Rick is to see how deeply he fears intimacy. His arrogance, his cruelty, his jokes, they are shields against the unbearable tenderness buried inside him. He's not detached because he feels nothing. He's detached because he feels too much. Every time someone gets close, he imagines the inevitable collapse, the moment they'll realize who he glass really is and turn away. So he preempts the loss by becoming the destroyer. He burns the bridge before it can crumble beneath him. It's not self-sabotage for the sake of drama. It's self-preservation for a man who has lost too many versions of himself to grief. There's something profoundly human about that. Rick, for all his multiversal power, is still chasing a basic need, the need to belong. But belonging requires surrender, and surrender demands trust. Two concepts that his mind, trained to deconstruct and doubt, cannot process. The scientist in him dissects everything he loves until it stops breathing. It's not malice, it's habit. He can't hold something without examining it. He can't love without trying to understand why he does, and by the time he's done analysing, the moment has died. His relationship with Morty embodies this tragedy. Morty, clumsy and naive, keeps trying to connect with Rick through care, through moral questions, through sheer persistence. And Rick, despite himself, responds not with honesty, but with proximity. He takes Morty along, not because he needs help, but because he needs presence. He needs someone to witness his existence without demanding explanation. Every insult, every dismissal is a test. Will you stay, even after I push you away? And every time Morty returns, Rick's armor cracks just a little, but he never lets it shatter completely. Love, to him, is a liability, a variable that ruins the equation. The truth is that Rick doesn't know how to exist without others, but he also doesn't know how to exist with them. He oscillates between isolation and intrusion, vanishing into his lab for days, then dragging everyone into catastrophes of his own making. It's his way of controlling the terms of connection. If he's the cause of the chaos, he's the one who decides when it ends. Real intimacy doesn't give him that luxury. It asks him to listen, to change, to soften. And Rick doesn't know how to do any of those things without feeling like he's dissolving. He has seen too many versions of connection fail. Families that fall apart, partners who leave, universes where love turns to ash. In a world of infinite possibilities, every relationship eventually breaks. That knowledge poisons his every attempt at sincerity. Why invest in what is statistically doomed? Why open a wound you know can't heal? To most, love is a leap of faith. To Rick, it's a calculated risk with infinite losses and no gains. So, he laughs at it. He calls it chemical delusion, evolutionary manipulation, sentimental nonsense. But behind the mockery is envy. Envy for those still innocent enough to try. Even his connection with his daughter, Beth, is defined by avoidance. She idolizes him because she sees his brilliance, not his brokenness. And Rick allows that illusion because it keeps the relationship manageable. If she sees him as a god, she can't judge him as a man. But deep down, he wants her to. He wants someone to see him without reverence, without fear. The tragedy is that the only way he knows how to reach her is through intellect, and intellect is the one language that can't translate love. So they orbit each other endlessly, two minds too similar to touch. Rick's relationships are experiments that always end in explosion. He replicates affection, tests it, watches it fail, then blames the formula instead of himself. Every time someone forgives him, it confuses him. Forgiveness doesn't fit into his equations. It implies mercy, something that shouldn't exist in a universe governed by chaos and indifference. When someone forgives him, they violate his worldview. And rather than accept that maybe the world still has room for grace, he dismisses it as stupidity. Because if mercy exists, then maybe he's wrong about everything. And Rick Sanchez would rather be alone than wrong. Connection also terrifies him because it exposes him to dependency. He's built his identity around autonomy, the man who needs no one, answers to no one, relies on nothing but himself. But every connection weakens that illusion. Every moment of affection, every shared silence, every unguarded smile, it chips away at the myth of self-sufficiency. That's why he runs. Not from people, but from the version of himself that exists around them, the one that feels. Feeling makes him real, and real things can break. There's an irony in how often Rick uses connection as a distraction. He surrounds himself with family, lovers, even enemies, not to bond with them, but to occupy the space that loneliness would otherwise fill. He talks endlessly, argues, flirts, insults, all to keep silence at bay, because silence reminds him of the truth, that for all his travels, for all his adventures, he is still alone in a way that no amount of company can fix. The void between him and others isn't distance, it's perception. He sees the structure behind every interaction, and once you see the pattern, you can't feel the magic. But sometimes the magic sneaks through. A quiet moment between chaos, Morty's small act of courage, Summer's defiant empathy, Beth's hesitant forgiveness, even Jerry's clumsy sincerity. These moments disarm him. They remind him that connection doesn't need to make sense. It doesn't need to last. It just needs to happen. For a brief instant, Rick allows himself to feel it, the warmth, the absurdity, the fleeting grace of being seen. And then, as always, he ruins it. He makes a joke, changes the subject, opens a portal. He can't stay in tenderness, it's too raw. But the fact that he runs from it proves he still feels it. You can only fear what still matters. His greatest fear isn't death or meaninglessness or even failure. It's intimacy. Because intimacy means reflection. It means seeing himself in someone else's eyes and realizing he's not just the smartest man in the universe, he's also the most broken. To be known fully is to lose control, and Rick's entire existence is built on control. That's why love feels like a threat. It doesn't ask for obedience or logic. It asks for surrender. And surrender, to Rick, feels like extinction. The failure of connection in his life isn't evidence that he's incapable of love. It's proof that he understands its magnitude too well. He knows love binds. It limits. It hurts. It creates responsibility, and responsibility means vulnerability. To love someone is to let them matter, and when everything matters, the weight becomes unbearable. His genius lets him manipulate gravity, but not the gravity of attachment. That's the one force he can't neutralize. What makes Rick's struggle so quietly tragic is that he keeps trying, despite himself. Every sarcastic "I don't care" hides an "I hope you don't leave." Every cruel remark is a desperate attempt to make rejection mutual. Every time he disappears into another universe, it's not to escape others, it's to escape the part of himself that still wants them. He'll never say it, but every portal he opens is a prayer. Maybe in the next world, I'll finally get this right. In the end, connection for Rick isn't a lesson he learns, it's a wound he tends to endlessly. He doesn't heal, he adapts. He learns to live with partial closeness, fleeting intimacy, half-truths. He convinces himself that's enough. And maybe, for someone who sees infinity, it is. Connection doesn't need to be permanent to be real. It just needs to exist for a moment long enough to remind him that isolation isn't destiny. There's a quiet scene that repeats itself across the infinite versions of his life. Rick sitting somewhere after everyone's gone to bed. The lab hums softly. The portal gun rests beside him. He looks at it, then at the empty couch where someone used to sit. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't move. He just sits there, letting the silence press against him like gravity. For once, he doesn't reach for the bottle or the switch. He lets himself feel it, the absence, the ache, the unbearable beauty of wanting something he can never keep. That's what connection means to him now. Not a solution, not redemption, just a moment of awareness. A reminder that, no matter how far he travels or how much he pretends otherwise, he is still made of the same fragile material as everyone else. The failure of connection, in the end, becomes its own kind of success, because even in his isolation, he still longs. And longing, however painful, is proof of life. Despair, for Rick Sanchez, isn't a storm that passes. It's a structure, something built, maintained, reinforced over time. It has foundations, walls, corridors, and rooms. It's not chaos. It's order. Rick's despair is the one thing he's designed perfectly, the only creation he's never tried to dismantle. Every decision, every failure, every laugh that turns into silence contributes to its construction. It's not something that happens to him, it's something he's made. Because despair, when understood deeply enough, becomes a form of control. He lives inside it like an architect, trapped within his own blueprint. Every room is familiar, every echo recognizable. The walls aren't made of grief itself, but of the thoughts he uses to justify it. Nothing matters. Everything dies. I've seen it all. These aren't cries of pain. They're structural beams. They keep the despair upright, give it shape, stability. Without them, it might collapse into something worse, something vulnerable, something that might need saving. For Rick, despair isn't the absence of hope. It's the containment of it. He's too intelligent for naive sadness. His despair is meticulous. It's not the despair of a man who has lost everything, but of one who has seen too much to believe in recovery. He knows every solution creates new problems. Every act of love invites loss. Every victory carries decay. His awareness has mapped the terrain of tragedy so completely that there's nowhere left to stand outside it. So he builds a home inside the ruins, decorates it with irony, fills it with laughter that never quite reaches the eyes. It's easier to live with despair when you make it familiar. There's a rhythm to how Rick manages his sadness. First comes the moment of stillness, that flicker of quiet, when something in him remembers what joy used to feel like. Then comes the recoil, the thought, the analysis. He names it, dissects it, sterilizes it. By the time he's done, the feeling is dead. Then he drinks. Not to forget, but to seal the process. Alcohol isn't his escape, it's his cement. It hardens the structure, reinforces the architecture. The hangover becomes ritual penance, proof that he's still capable of punishment, if not redemption. Rick doesn't despair because he's weak. He despairs because he's honest. He looks at existence without flinching. He sees the cycle of creation and destruction, of love and loss, of joy and decay, and he refuses to lie about it. Most people protect themselves with illusions, faith, routine, family. Rick dismantles those illusions the way others dismantle machines. He takes apart everything comforting, until all that remains is the raw truth. Nothing lasts. To him, despair isn't pessimism, it's clarity. It's the cleanest view of the universe, stripped of all pretense. And yet, that clarity is corrosive. To see everything as temporary makes everything feel weightless. You can't grieve what you know will vanish, but you also can't love it. You can't take joy seriously when you know it's fleeting. Rick's despair feeds on that contradiction. He wants to feel meaning, but every attempt to do so triggers his intellect, which reminds him it's all illusion. The battle between his heart and mind isn't dramatic, it's mechanical. His mind always wins, but the victory feels like defeat. He's aware of this cycle. He knows how he constructs his despair. Sometimes he even mocks it. He'll call himself out mid-breakdown, joke about his own pain, make meta-comments about the futility of growth. But the awareness doesn't free him. It deepens the trap. Because now he's not just sad, he's sad about knowing he's sad. His intelligence turns despair into recursion, an emotional fractal that folds in on itself infinitely. You can't outthink despair when your mind is the one building it. Rick's despair is also architectural in another sense. It's inhabited. Inside its rooms live all the versions of himself he can't stand. The father who failed, the husband who left, the scientist who played God, the child who believed in things. They move through his memories like ghosts, haunting the hallways of his mind. He can't erase them, not completely, so he buries them in irony, locks the doors, and tells himself he's fine. But sometimes, late at night, he hears them moving. That's when he drinks harder. That's when he laughs louder. That's when the architecture feels most alive. If you look closely at Rick's despair, you'll notice it's symmetrical. Every wall of self-loathing has a mirrored wall of brilliance. Every act of destruction has a matching act of creation. It's balanced, almost beautiful, in its consistency. He can't destroy without also creating something new from the ashes. He can't grieve without turning it into insight. His despair is productive. It fuels invention, humor, philosophy. That's why he can't let go of it. It gives him purpose. Without despair, his genius would have nowhere to go. There's an elegance to how he moves through this structure. He never lingers in one room too long. He knows when to leave before the weight becomes unbearable. If one hallway of thoughts grows too dark, he opens a portal to another. Sometimes he brings Morty along, a companion through the ruins. Morty doesn't understand what they're walking through, but his presence changes the atmosphere. He brings light to corners Rick forgot existed. And, for a moment, the architecture shifts. The walls hum differently. The despair feels less like a cage and more like a cathedral, sacred, painful, full of echoes that mean something. The most tragic part of Rick's architecture is that it's beautiful. It's built with care, precision, genius. Every argument against hope is airtight. Every justification for detachment is poetic. He's made despair into art, which means he can't destroy it without losing the one thing he's ever done perfectly. To let go of despair would be to admit that imperfection might be worth loving. And that's something Rick, for all his intellect, can't do. Still, there are cracks in the structure. Little imperfections he can't repair. A family dinner that lasts a few minutes longer than usual. A joke that turns into genuine laughter. Morty saying goodnight and meaning it. These small human moments slip through the walls like light under a door. Rick pretends not to notice, but he does. He just can't face what they mean. That despair, no matter how well built, can never be absolute. There's always some part of existence that resists it, some part that refuses to fit into the design. Sometimes, when the night is quiet and the bottles are empty, Rick finds himself standing in the middle of his own architecture, that mental labyrinth of grief and logic, and he realizes he's alone in it. Not trapped, not doomed, just alone. The realization doesn't bring tears, it brings stillness. He understands that despair has limits. Even infinity, when experienced long enough, becomes finite. Even sadness loses its shape. And in that dissolution, something shifts. Not hope exactly, but space. The tiniest hint of air between the walls. Maybe that's the secret he's been circling all along, that despair, like any structure, is temporary. It feels eternal while you're inside it, but eventually entropy wins. The walls decay, the corridors collapse, and what's left isn't revelation but silence. And maybe, just maybe, that silence is what he's been building toward without realizing it, a space empty enough for something new to begin. Rick would never call that hope. He'd call it physics. But physics and hope aren't so different. Both depend on persistence, on the idea that movement continues, even without meaning. The atoms don't stop. The energy doesn't end. Despair, no. Matter how total, can't freeze the flow. And so, even in his most broken moments, Rick keeps going. Not because he believes things will get better, but because he knows the universe won't wait for him to stop. Existence is motion, and he's part of it, whether he likes it or not. When he finally sits down, exhausted, in the center of his invisible architecture, he looks around at everything he's built, the ideas, the jokes, the defenses, the walls, and he almost laughs. Because he realizes that all this time, he's been trying to build a place where pain could live without destroying him. And somehow, in doing so, he's made something oddly human. Despair, for Rick Sanchez, is not the end of feeling. It's the architecture that proves he still feels at all. Control is the illusion Rick Sanchez worships most. It's his religion, his shield, his addiction. Every invention, every manipulation, every sarcastic deflection grows from that hunger. The need to believe that if he can't make the universe make sense, he can at least make it obey. It's the only comfort left to a man who's seen too much chaos to trust anything else. Control is his substitute for faith. It's how he keeps the void at arm's length. But the irony, as always with Rick, is that the tighter he grips, the less he holds. To Rick, control began as curiosity. As a child, it probably felt like wonder, the joy of understanding, of making things work, of seeing cause and effect unfold beneath his hands. But knowledge has a habit of mutating when it meets loss. Somewhere along the line, that innocent desire to understand became a desperate need to dominate. Maybe it was grief, maybe betrayal, maybe the slow realization that everything he loved was temporary. Whatever, the origin, the outcome is the same. Control became his only language. He doesn't just solve problems, he colonizes them. Every experiment, every portal, every universe he touches becomes a sandbox for control. He tweaks gravity, rewrites biology, loops time. It's not about exploration anymore. It's about proof. Proof that he can still shape something, that he can still matter in a universe that keeps insisting he doesn't. Each invention is a small rebellion against entropy. Each new equation says, I refuse to be powerless. But the universe doesn't negotiate. The more he builds, the more it slips through his fingers. Control, by nature, is temporary, and Rick knows that better than anyone. His life is littered with the remains of failed control, the relationships he tried to engineer through logic, the adventures he orchestrated only to lose himself in them, the endless attempts to contain pain by turning it into a problem to solve. He spent lifetimes building systems that collapse under the weight of their own precision. Because the truth Rick can't bear to admit is that the universe's most defining trait, and his own, is unpredictability. No formula can calculate love, no device can rewrite regret, and no amount of brilliance can stop the heart from feeling what it shouldn't. That's why he drinks, not for pleasure, but for surrender. The alcohol is the only force in his life that controls him instead of the other way around. It's a trade, a brief exchange of authority. For a few hours, he's no longer the architect of reality, he's a passenger. The chaos inside the bottle mirrors the chaos he can't master outside of it. It's not freedom, but it's relief. He laughs at himself for needing it, calls it weakness, but he never truly tries to quit, because deep down he knows the truth. Control exhausts him, and letting go, even chemically, is the closest thing to peace he ever finds. His illusion of control also shapes how he deals with others. He doesn't talk, he lectures. He doesn't ask, he commands. Conversation for him isn't about connection, it's about containment. He keeps people at a safe distance by dictating the terms of engagement. If he can control the narrative, he doesn't have to feel the uncertainty of intimacy. Every sarcastic remark, every cutting joke, every burst of dominance, it's all architecture, control through language. Because to Rick, unpredictability equals pain. And people, by their very nature, are unpredictable. Yet, for all his attempts to dominate life, control never truly satisfies him. It's a hollow victory, an endless maintenance task. Every triumph decays into anxiety, a new variable to manage, a new threat to anticipate. He can't stop building, not because he's inspired, but because stillness terrifies him. Stillness means vulnerability. It means having to feel what's left when the noise stops. So he keeps moving, keeps fixing, keeps conquering. But the universe isn't a machine that breaks. It's a living chaos, that breathes, adapts, resists. Every attempt to master it only deepens his dependence on control itself. That's why his greatest fear isn't death, it's helplessness. The idea that something could happen to him or the people he still secretly loves that he can't undo, can't reverse, can't outthink. It's the one truth he can't tolerate, that the universe owes him nothing. His portal gun, his technology, even his wit, they're all tools against helplessness. And yet, time and again, he's reminded that control is conditional. He can't stop a family from fracturing. He can't stop Morty from growing up. He can't stop himself from caring. The illusion breaks in small moments, and every time it does, he rebuilds it stronger. There's a cruel beauty in watching him try, because every act of control is also an act of hope. If he truly believed in nothing, he wouldn't bother. The fact that he keeps trying to manipulate, to fix, to manage, it means he still believes something can be preserved, that somewhere in the noise there's something worth saving. His control isn't just ego, it's yearning. The yearning of a man who can't stand the idea that meaning might exist outside his grasp, but the universe, in its quiet cruelty, keeps reminding him otherwise. The more he knows, the less he governs. The more he creates, the more chaos he releases. His inventions develop wills of their own. His actions ripple beyond his understanding. Every solution spawns a new catastrophe. It's not incompetence, it's inevitability. The cosmos doesn't bend to intellect, it bends to entropy. And entropy is the one constant Rick can't rewrite. He's painfully aware of this irony. He knows that control is illusion. He even says it. But awareness doesn't dissolve need. It just makes it bitter. He mocks himself for chasing power, for trying to outwit existence, and then goes right back to doing it. It's the same loop that defines his entire life, knowing better and doing it anyway. Because even if control is futile, it gives him something to hold. Even a false anchor is better than drifting. Rick's illusion of control is also visible in how he handles emotion. He measures it like a scientist, identifies, isolates, suppresses. If sadness rises, he calls it chemistry. If guilt surfaces, he calls it narrative. He translates feeling into data until it loses its power. But emotions don't disappear. They accumulate. They linger in his gestures, in his silences, in the way his laughter catches at the end of a sentence. The illusion holds on the surface, but underneath, the current keeps pulling. He's drowning in the control he thinks he's mastered. Sometimes, though, something pierces through, a small, unexpected moment that defies his logic. Morty's simple decency, Beth's forgiveness, Summer's resilience, Jerry's fragile sincerity. These moments remind Rick that life doesn't need his permission to exist. Meaning happens with or without him. Control, no matter how precise, can't stop love from forming, can't stop laughter from happening, can't stop people from caring, even when they shouldn't. And in those rare flashes of clarity, Rick feels something close to humility. It doesn't last, but it leaves a trace, a whisper that says, maybe the universe isn't supposed to be controlled. But humility is dangerous to him. It opens cracks in the armor, so he returns to what he knows: invention, sarcasm, alcohol. He reconstructs the illusion, because the alternative, acceptance, feels too much like surrender. And surrender, in his vocabulary, still means defeat. Even when he understands that control is killing him, he can't stop craving it. That's what makes it an illusion and not a choice. It's built into his survival instinct. his way of staying sane in a world that doesn't care. There's an image that defines him. Rick, standing before a control panel, surrounded by infinite buttons, switches, and lights. Every control system he's ever designed, every mechanism of order, glowing around him like constellations. He looks powerful, godlike even, but inside he's empty, because deep down he knows none of these controls change the one thing that matters, himself. You can master universes and still lose your own mind. You can rewrite the laws of existence and still be ruled by the smallest, simplest truth that you're human and you hurt. When the night ends and the lights in his lab flicker out, Rick sits in silence. No switches to flip, no chaos to contain, no universe to repair, just him and the quiet. For a moment he feels it, the weight of power, the hollowness behind control, and instead of laughing, he exhales. The breath trembles. He doesn't move. He lets the illusion fade just a little, enough to glimpse what's beneath it. Not peace, not redemption, but stillness. The kind that comes when you stop trying to fix what isn't broken and simply watch it exist. That's the cruel mercy of the illusion of control. It's not meant to be defeated, only seen through. Rick will never stop reaching for it, but maybe, somewhere deep inside, he already knows it was never about mastery. It was about trying to find one steady thing in a shifting universe, and realizing, too late, that the only steady thing was the reaching itself. Meaning. It's the one thing Rick Sanchez can't stop chasing, and the one thing he refuses to believe in. Every universe he visits, every experiment he runs, every drink he downs is, in some quiet way, a search for meaning's ghost. The trace of something that once made sense, but now only lingers as memory. He tells himself it's gone. That meaning is just a story told by frightened minds. But he keeps looking anyway. He can't help it. Because to understand everything and still feel nothing is the cruelest kind of ignorance. For most people, meaning grows from faith. Faith in love, in purpose, in some guiding order. Rick dismantled that faith long ago. He tore the scaffolding apart piece by piece until there was nothing left but chaos. And yet, chaos itself began to feel like a design. The more he searched for randomness, the more he found patterns, not divine but human. The way people keep caring, even when it hurts. The way laughter erupts, even in tragedy. The way every being, no matter how small, tries to give itself reason. That persistence disturbs him more than any god could, because it means meaning isn't given, it's built, and if it can be built, then he's the only one who's chosen not to. Rick lives haunted by what meaning used to feel like. The ghost doesn't appear as a revelation, it appears in fragments. A sound, a word, a flash of memory. The laughter of a family that once existed. The warmth of a world that hasn't been invented yet. It's not nostalgia, not exactly. It's recognition. The sense that something beautiful used to live inside him before intellect turned it to ash. He doesn't want it back, not really. He just wants to stop feeling its absence. Because absence, when you've seen infinite realities, becomes unbearable. It's not the emptiness that hurts, it's the memory of fullness. In his better moments, Rick admits that he envies those who still believe. Morty with his naive optimism, Beth with her fragile faith in family. Even Jerry, fumbling through mediocrity, still believes that love means something. Rick mocks them because he can't join them. To him, meaning feels like a lie told to children, comforting but false. Yet, when he sees them laugh together, when he sees them cry and recover and keep going, something in him stirs. He wants to laugh too, but laughter without irony feels foreign. He wants to care, but caring without control feels like drowning. The ghost presses close, but he can't touch it. The more Rick denies meaning, the more it finds him. It shows up in small, uninvited ways, the way he hesitates before abandoning someone, the way he lingers at the edge of family dinners, the way his voice softens when Morty looks up to him. These aren't signs of sentimentality, they're symptoms of longing. Meaning has infected him in the only place his intellect can't reach, the part of him that still remembers how to feel. It's not a weakness. It's an echo, but Rick is terrified of that echo. To acknowledge it would mean admitting that maybe all his cynicism, all his mockery, all his destruction was just one long tantrum against disappointment. That his disbelief isn't strength, but grief. He doesn't hate meaning because it's false. He hates it because it once abandoned him. Somewhere in the multiverse, maybe in some version of his past, meaning failed to keep its promise. It didn't save the person he loved. It didn't stop the suffering. And ever since, he's been trying to punish it by pretending it doesn't exist. Meaning, to Rick, is dangerous because it demands belief, and belief makes you vulnerable. When you believe something matters, you open yourself to loss. You invest, you hope, you care, and when it collapses, it takes you with it. That's why he'd rather live without it, because living without meaning hurts less than losing it again. It's not nihilism for the sake of philosophy. It's nihilism as grief management. A man can't lose what he's already declared meaningless, and yet the ghost of meaning never leaves him alone. It follows him into every world, hides in every silence. He tries to drown it in alcohol, distract it with chaos, mock it with intellect, but it's always there, patient and unashamed. Meaning doesn't argue with him, it just exists. It waits. It knows that no matter how far he runs, Rick is still human enough to want something that endures. Sometimes he almost gives in the soft moments after destruction, when he's too tired to argue with himself. Rick lets meaning slip back in through the cracks. A quiet look from Morty. A moment of shared wonder in the middle of a dying world. A wordless understanding between him and Beth. For a second, he lets it feel real. He lets himself believe that maybe things matter, even if they don't last. But the second he realizes what he's doing, he recoils. He mocks it, buries it, calls it weakness. The ghost retreats, but it always returns. The truth is, Rick's war with meaning is also a war with himself. His intellect rejects it, but his heart keeps resurrecting it. He knows that meaning isn't something you find, it's something you live. But living requires surrender, and surrender still feels like failure. So he stays in limbo, a man who can define everything except why he keeps trying. Meaning hides in the one thing Rick can't replicate, connection. It's in the unpredictable warmth of people who choose to care despite everything. He can clone bodies, rebuild memories, rewrite time, but he can't force meaning. It only appears in the space between choices, in the gaps between words. The scientist in him can't stand that. How can something so intangible be so powerful? How can it persist in a universe ruled by decay? The answer, that meaning is born of impermanence, is something he refuses to accept. He'd rather live forever with nothing than briefly with everything. In rare moments of clarity, Rick sees that the ghost isn't haunting him at all. He's haunting it. Meaning never died. He did, in small pieces, every time he chose certainty over wonder. Every time he chose intellect over intimacy. Every time he laughed at sincerity instead of joining it. The ghost of meaning isn't a punishment. It's an invitation. It's the part of the universe still willing to believe in him, even when he's stopped believing in it. There's a kind of mercy in that. Meaning doesn't demand Rick's faith, it just offers him presence. It waits, knowing that one day, when the machinery of control finally breaks and the noise of genius quiets, he might notice it sitting beside him. Not as revelation, but as simplicity, a reason that doesn't need to be explained. And maybe that's what Rick's journey really is, not the search for knowledge or the conquest of worlds, but the slow, painful rediscovery of meaning as something fragile, human, and real. He won't call it that, of course. He'll keep pretending it's just inertia, just curiosity, just another experiment. But every time he saves Morty when he doesn't have to, every time he hesitates before leaving his family behind, every time he looks at the stars and sighs instead of laughing, the ghost is there, watching, waiting, breathing through him. In the end, Rick's tragedy isn't that he can't find meaning, it's that he keeps demanding proof of it. He wants it to be measurable, provable, permanent. But meaning, by its nature, can't survive dissection. It lives only in surrender. It's what happens when you stop trying to solve the universe and start letting it hold you. Rick will never admit that out loud, but maybe, somewhere deep inside, he already knows. The ghost wouldn't follow him so faithfully if it didn't believe he'd one day turn around. One night, alone in his lab, surrounded by the remnants of things that were supposed to matter, inventions, the bottles, the fragments of laughter. Rick pauses, the air hums. Somewhere far away, his family sleeps. The silence feels heavier than usual. For once, he doesn't feel it. He doesn't move. And in that stillness, the ghost settles beside him. It doesn't speak. It doesn't explain. It just exists. And for a moment, he doesn't need to understand it. He just feels it, faint, unprovable, alive. That's meaning, or what's left of it. The ghost that never leaves, no matter how many universes he burns. Immortality for Rick Sanchez was never a gift. It was an accident of genius, a side effect of knowing too much and dying too many times. Somewhere between the experiments, the cloning, the endless universes, and the deliberate refusal to stay dead, Rick became functionally immortal. He can't be ended in any meaningful way. But immortality, as he's learned, isn't the same as living forever. It's dying infinitely, just slower, quieter, and without release. For most, death gives life its shape. It's the border that makes the picture visible, the shadow that defines the light. But Rick erased that border. And when he did, the picture started to dissolve. Time lost its flavor. Consequence lost its teeth. Every moment became interchangeable. He can always start over, always escape, always rebuild. It sounds like freedom, but it's the purest kind of prison. Immortality steals the one thing that makes existence precious, the knowledge that it will end. There was a time when Rick believed immortality would make him fearless, that without death he'd finally be free to think, to explore, to exist without limits. But limits are what make meaning possible. Without them, everything becomes flat. He can't lose, but he can't win either. Every triumph becomes temporary, every failure reversible. The stakes vanish, and with them, purpose. When nothing can be lost, nothing can be loved. Immortality doesn't protect him from pain, it sterilizes it. And in that sterilization, life turns cold. Rick's immortality isn't just physical, it's emotional. He's perfected the art of survival, not just in body, but in spirit. Every time something threatens to hurt him, he regenerates in a new way. Another joke, another bottle, another theory to explain it all away. His consciousness is a network of escape hatches. He dies daily, in small doses, in disappointments, in arguments, in the silent moments after laughter fades. and each time he revives through detachment. It's not resilience, it's decay disguised as endurance. He tells himself he doesn't fear death, and maybe that's true, but he fears permanence. Death is too final for a man addicted to undoing. Immortality gives him the illusion of control, another way to pretend he's still choosing. If he can't die, then no one can truly abandon him, because he can always leave first. He doesn't have to face endings if he refuses to acknowledge them. But the cost of that defiance is isolation. When you live forever, everyone else becomes temporary, and when everyone is temporary, love becomes unbearable. Rick's immortality isn't a secret to him. He knows the mechanisms, the technology, the biology, the contingencies. He's seen the alternate selves, the backup bodies, the contingency plans that make death a joke. But the humour fades the longer it goes on. There's no punchline to forever, just repetition. The same mistakes, the same patterns, the same heartbreaks, replaying across infinite versions of the same man. It's not eternity he's trapped in, it's himself. Immortality also destroys morality. When you can outlive consequences, right and wrong start to blur. Rick doesn't have to live with guilt. He can just outlast it. Every atrocity, every failure, every cruel choice becomes a story he can walk away from. But memory doesn't forget as easily as time. The weight accumulates. The faces of the dead, the echoes of those who once mattered, pile up in his mind like sediment. He tells himself he doesn't care, but the quiet moments betray him. You can't live forever without remembering forever. And memory, unlike death, is merciless. He sometimes wonders if immortality is just another kind of death, one that's stretched so thin it starts to look like life. Every day is another variation of survival, another chapter in an unfinished story that doesn't know how to end. He laughs at those who chase eternal life, calls them fools, but the laughter is hollow, because deep down he knows he's the fool. He found eternity, and it turned to dust in his hands. What hurts most isn't the endlessness, it's the erasure of meaning that comes with it. Mortality gives us urgency. It gives us reason to say, I love you, before it's too late, to chase joy before it fades, to forgive before silence settles. Immortality robs Rick of that urgency. There's always another chance, another world, another moment. So he stops reaching. He stops trying. He becomes a ghost that lingers instead of living. His immortality doesn't make him powerful, it makes him passive. When you can't lose anything, you stop wanting. Still, Rick can't let it go. He clings to immortality like a safety net, even as it strangles him. Because beneath all his despair, all his philosophy, all his jokes, Rick is still terrified of dying. Not the act itself, but the finality. The possibility that death might not bring understanding, that it might be as meaningless as everything else. Immortality, for all its emptiness, at least gives him the illusion of continuation. It lets him delay the confrontation with ultimate silence. But that delay has its own price. He watches the people he loves age and fade while he remains unchanged. He becomes the witness to impermanence, the living reminder that time moves even when he doesn't. Morty grows older, Beth hardens, Summer becomes restless, and Rick stays the same. Every year, he becomes less real to them, a relic, a ghost in his own family's story. They mourn him before he's gone, because he's already halfway out of reach. That's the curse of the immortal among mortals, to live long enough to watch yourself become irrelevant. Sometimes, Rick envies the simplicity of mortality. He sees it in others, the beauty of knowing the clock is ticking, the courage that comes from that knowledge. Mortals love differently. They forgive faster, dream harder, risk more. Their lives burn brighter because they end. He envies their fragility because it makes them real. His own life, stretched across infinity, feels translucent. You can see the outlines, but there's no substance. There are moments when he tries to end it. Not always consciously, but through carelessness, through dangerous experiments, through letting himself drift too close to annihilation. Each time, something intervenes, a clone, a failsafe, another Rick. He built his own immortality so well that even he can't dismantle it. The cage has no key because he designed it that way. Part of him must have known he'd change his mind one day, that even despair, when prolonged long enough, becomes unbearable. So he trapped himself in survival, condemned to keep existing long after he's tired of it. But there's something strange about endless life. It gives you infinite opportunities to rediscover wonder, even if he denies it, even if he laughs at it. Every once in a while, Rick sees something that reminds him that existence still has surprises left, a new world with colours he's never seen, a child laughing at something absurd, a version of himself who's happy. These glimpses don't heal him, but they puncture the monotony. They remind him that even forever isn't infinite enough to erase curiosity. And maybe, in some quiet corner of his soul, that curiosity is keeping him alive for a reason. Immortality, for Rick, is both curse and mirror. It reflects everything he's refused to confront, the grief he never processed, the love he never admitted, the forgiveness he never earned. It shows him the endless version of himself he's afraid to become. But maybe that reflection, unbearable as it is also a lesson. Maybe immortality isn't about living forever. Maybe it's about learning how to live despite forever. In the quiet moments between worlds, Rick sometimes looks up at the stars and feels an ache that has no name. It's not sadness exactly. It's recognition, the awareness that he's still here, still conscious, still capable of feeling something, even after all this time. And in that feeling, however faint, there's something like grace. Because if meaning can survive inside immortality, then maybe nothing is truly lost. Not even him. When he finally returns to his lab, surrounded by endless versions of himself, he looks into their eyes and realizes they're all pretending too, all laughing, all coping, all tired. Immortality didn't make them gods. It made them mirrors of each other's pain. And maybe, in that shared fatigue, there's something sacred, the closest thing an immortal can have to communion. Rick won't call it hope. He doesn't believe in hope. But when he closes his eyes that night, he dreams of an ending, not as a wish for death, but as a wish for completion, a point where even infinity pauses long enough for peace to enter. That, in its own strange way, is his version of heaven, not eternity, but rest. There's a moment that comes to everyone who has lived long enough to see their own reflection change, that quiet, disorienting second when the face staring back isn't who you remember being. For Rick Sanchez, that moment never ends. Every reflection, every clone, every alternate version of himself is another reminder that identity, for him, has become as unstable as the universes he travels through. The mirror doesn't lie, it multiplies. And in its endless reflections, Rick sees not truth, but noise, infinite variations of a self he no longer recognizes. He has met himself 1,000 times. Some versions cruel, others kind, some smarter, some broken beyond repair. A few are even happy, though he always doubts that happiness when he sees it. Each one mirrors a possibility, an alternate decision, a different past. But instead of comfort, the knowledge fills him with nausea. Identity, to Rick, used to be a constant, the one thing he thought he could rely on. Now, it's a question with no answer. If infinite Ricks exist, each believing they're the original, then what makes any of them real? The mirror of the self becomes a hall of reflections with no center. At first, he laughed at that thought. Infinite versions of him meant infinite brilliance, a monument to his intellect. But as time passed, that brilliance began to feel hollow. Each new Rick he met carried the same pain in slightly different packaging, the same sarcasm, the same guilt, the same refusal to heal. They were all fragments of the same wound, each mirror showing him not what he could be, but what he could never escape. When you can see every possible version of yourself, self-improvement starts to feel like delusion. Why change when every version fails in a different way? In the Citadel, surrounded by Ricks, he once saw what looked like order, a society built entirely of his own mind, a perfect reflection of himself. But the more he looked, the more grotesque it became. The Ricks weren't free. They were enslaved by their sameness. Their intelligence had turned into hierarchy, their individuality into bureaucracy. They weren't unique. They were statistical noise organized into ego. The Citadel wasn't a monument to genius. It was a mausoleum for identity. That was the day Rick realized that sameness is just another form of death. And yet, he can't stop returning to that mirror. Every invention, every act of defiance, every cruel joke is a way of checking if he still exists. If there's still a version of him left that feels different, that feels alive. Because that's the true horror of multiplicity. Not the existence of other Ricks, but the possibility that none of them are real. That consciousness itself is just a shared hallucination repeating across infinity. He jokes about it, of course. He calls it quantum narcissism or existential recursion. But beneath the joke is fear, not of others, of emptiness. For someone like Rick, self-awareness is both power and poison. He sees himself with the same clarity he sees the universe, dissected, categorized, explained. But understanding yourself isn't the same as knowing who you are. The mind can analyze, but the heart identifies. And Rick's heart, buried under layers of intellect and irony, hasn't spoken in a long time. He can describe himself endlessly, his flaws, his brilliance, his habits, but he can't feel himself anymore. The mirror shows him everything except presence. There's a cruel paradox in how he interacts with his other selves. He despises them because they reflect his own failings. Yet he needs them because they confirm he still exists. If he's just one version among infinite, then at least he's not alone. But the comfort never lasts. Every time he meets another Rick, it ends in conflict, because deep down he doesn't want confirmation. He wants exception. He wants to be the one who escapes the pattern, the Rick who finally breaks, free from the loop of self-loathing and denial. But no matter how far he travels, every mirror he looks into shows the same man pretending he's different. It's not just the other Ricks that haunt him, it's the internal reflections too. The moments when he catches himself mid-sentence, hearing the same words he once mocked in others. The split second when his laughter sounds unfamiliar. The way he sometimes sees flashes of his father in his own hands, his tone, his impatience. The self is a mirror that keeps turning inward, reflecting generations, regrets, repetitions. Rick doesn't just carry himself, he carries everyone who made him. And for a man obsessed with autonomy, that's unbearable. The mirror also reflects the parts of him he refuses to acknowledge, the ones that still care. When he risks everything to save Morty, when he apologizes to Beth without sarcasm, when he hesitates before pulling a trigger, those moments appear like cracks in the reflection, glimpses of someone softer underneath. He always repairs the glass afterward, pretending it was just a glitch, but the cracks never truly vanish. They multiply, and each one reminds him that no matter how much he denies it, there's still a person inside the performance. The truth Rick avoids isn't that he's broken, it's that he's multiple. There isn't one Rick Sanchez. There never was. There's the genius, the addict, the father, the friend, the coward, the god, the ghost. Each one fighting for dominance, each one pretending to be the real one. His despair doesn't come from being fragmented, it comes from thinking he shouldn't be. He wants unity in a universe that doesn't allow it. But identity, like meaning, isn't static. It's motion. And motion is the one thing Rick keeps resisting. Sometimes, in quieter moments, he catches a glimpse of something different in the mirror. Not the genius or the cynic, but the witness. The part of him that sees it all without judgment. The part that isn't trying to fix, explain, or escape. It's fleeting, but it's real. And in those moments, he feels something close to peace. Because the witness doesn't need to control or understand, it just observes. Maybe that's what he's been searching for all along, a self that doesn't need to be right, only real. The mirror of the self also reflects mortality, even in immortality. Every time he regenerates, every time a clone awakens, the question reappears, is this still me, or just another echo? Each new body remembers the old pain, but the emotion feels second-hand, like reading someone else's diary. Continuity becomes a story he tells himself. I'm still Rick. But are you, if every cell has been replaced, every thought rewritten, every choice undone? The mirror doesn't answer, it just stares back. The tragedy of Rick's reflection is that he understands the illusion but can't live without it. He knows the self is a construct, a collage of memories and reactions, but he needs it anyway, because without it there's no I left to question. Without the mirror there's only the void. And Rick, for all his cynicism, still prefers the illusion of self to the silence of nothing. The mirror, for all its distortion, gives him something to stand in front of, something to argue with, to hate, to protect. It gives him a reason to keep existing. One day, maybe, he'll stop fighting the reflection. Maybe he'll learn to let all the versions of himself exist without trying to erase or elevate any of them. The coward and the genius, the cruel and the kind, the father and the fugitive, all true, all incomplete. Because identity isn't a destination, it's a process. And even Rick Sanchez, for all his godlike awareness, is still in motion. At night, when the noise of the lab dies down and the universe quiets for just a breath, Rick sometimes catches his reflection in the glass of a half-finished invention. For a heartbeat, he doesn't recognize the face. Then, something softer flickers behind the exhaustion, a small, human pulse of recognition. Not pride, not disgust, just understanding. He raises his glass to it, not to toast, not to mourn, but to acknowledge. The mirror doesn't answer, but for once, it doesn't need to. It just reflects what's there. A man who's seen too much, lost too much, and still, somehow, exists. That's all the mirror was ever trying to show him. Not perfection, not redemption, just presence. The proof that even when everything else breaks apart, the self, however fractured, still watches, still wonders, still endures. Love, for Rick Sanchez, is both the origin of everything he's become and the one force he can't outthink. It's the glitch in his code, the thing that keeps breaking through, no matter how many times he rewrites himself. For all his talk of meaninglessness, for all his detachment and cynicism, Rick has been shaped more by love than by science, more by loss than by logic. Every universe he's destroyed, every bottle he's drained, every cruel joke he's made, all of it hums with the same undertone. Love turned unbearable. Love too big for a man who refuses to hold it. He would never call it that. He'd call it attachment, vulnerability, chemical dependency, anything but love. He'd rather dissect it than feel it, because love, when left alive, moves in directions you can't predict. It makes choices illogical, risks irrational, outcomes uncontrollable. For someone like Rick, who spent a lifetime trying to master the unpredictable, love is the ultimate humiliation. It reminds him that even gods can bleed, that even intellect has a pulse, that even the smartest man in the universe can be undone by something as stupid as care. The fragility of love isn't in how easily it dies, it's in how persistently it survives. Rick's life is proof of that. No matter how many walls he builds, no matter how many worlds he leaves behind, love finds its way through the cracks. It lingers in his guilt, in his protectiveness, in the quiet way he watches over the people he claims to have outgrown. It's in the way he shields Morty during chaos, in the way he fixes things for Beth without ever admitting why, in the way his voice softens when he says goodbye, even when he knows he'll be back. He pretends not to notice these things, but they're the only moments where he feels anything real. Love, for Rick, is dangerous because it requires faith. Faith in something other than control. To love is to surrender, to trust something outside yourself. It means accepting that you can't quantify what matters most. Rick's mind can map galaxies, but it can't map that. And so he resists it, fights it, mocks it. He tells himself, love is a trick, a distraction, an evolutionary con. But when he's alone, when the world is quiet and the laughter fades, he knows the truth. Love is the only thing that still hurts. And pain, in a life as numb as his, is proof of something still alive. There was a time, long before the endless universes and the experiments, when love might have been simple for him. Before the betrayals, before the self-inflicted isolation. Somewhere in the ruins of his memories lies a woman, or perhaps many women across many worlds, who reminded him that connection doesn't always need an equation. But she's gone, and in her absence, he turned love into a science problem he could never solve. The loss didn't make him stop loving. It made him stop trusting himself to love well. He's not heartless. His cruelty isn't the absence of love, it's the distortion of it. The way he lashes out, the way he mocks, the way he leaves, it's all defense. It's easier to ruin love before it ruins him. He's convinced himself that pain on his own terms is better than heartbreak on someone else's. But every time he walks away from love, it follows him anyway, wearing new faces. Morty's innocence, Beth's stubborn loyalty, even the absurd devotion of Jerry. It all circles back to the same truth. He's surrounded by love he refuses to accept. Rick's tragedy isn't that he doesn't love, it's that he can't sustain it. Every time he lets himself care, he feels the weight of everything he's done pressing against that care, threatening to corrupt it. He believes he's poison, that his love, no matter how sincere, can only destroy what it touches. So he pulls away before he can prove himself wrong. He tells himself it's mercy, that he's protecting them from himself, but deep down, he's protecting himself from the possibility that he might actually be capable of love that lasts. There's a tenderness to his denial. When he tells Morty that family doesn't matter, it's not truth, it's prayer. He's begging the universe to let him stop caring, because caring means loss, and loss is the one equation he can't rewrite. He's built entire philosophies to hide from that reality, but love keeps surviving them. It's the ghost in his machine, persistent, unkillable, mocking him in every act of compassion he pretends isn't compassion. Sometimes he lets it win for a moment. When he comforts Morty after a failure, when he fixes a mistake he swore he wouldn't care about, when he sits quietly while his family eats without him. Those are the moments where love leaks through the armor. He'll never admit it, but those moments mean more to him than any invention, any discovery, any victory over time and space. Love is the only thing in his universe that still surprises him. And yet, love also terrifies him, because it reveals his limits. You can't love infinitely. You can't love without loss. To love is to agree to be broken someday. For a man who's seen infinite endings, that's unbearable. He's watched love die in 1,000 universes, watched versions of himself destroy it, abandon it, mourn it. The pattern is too consistent to ignore. He believes love is doomed not because of fate, but because of himself. He's the constant in every failure. Every heartbreak carries his fingerprints. Still, he keeps returning to it. No matter how many times he runs, love finds him again. It's the one law he can't rewrite. He can mock it, deny it, dilute it, but he can't erase it. Even his despair is rooted in it. Even his nihilism carries traces of longing. Every nothing matters hides a silent, I wish it did. That's the secret he'll never say out loud. That for all his cosmic cynicism, he still believes in love enough to hate it. Love's fragility is what makes it unbearable for Rick, but it's also what makes it sacred. He sees that fragility in Morty's trust, in Beth's forgiveness, in the way life continues despite everything. Love's weakness is its strength. It breaks, and it still tries again. It's not logical, not sustainable, not safe. And yet, it's the only force in the universe that keeps rebuilding itself after destruction. Maybe that's what keeps Rick tethered to existence, the quiet, relentless stupidity of love. In one of his darker nights, when he's too tired to fight and too sober to escape, Rick sits in the dark and thinks about all the people he's driven away. The ones who stayed despite him, the ones who didn't. He thinks about the small kindnesses he's ruined, the laughter he's turned bitter, the apologies he's swallowed. And for the first time, he doesn't justify it. He just feels it, the weight of love lost and love surviving. It hurts, but for once, he doesn't run from the hurt, because in that pain, he feels alive. Love, for Rick Sanchez, will never be safe. It will always be fragile, always imperfect, always fleeting. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the fragility isn't a flaw, it's the proof that it's real. The strongest things, after all, aren't the ones that last forever. They're the ones that exist despite not being able to. And so, Rick continues, still laughing, still breaking, still building, still loving, in his strange, crooked way. He'll never call it love, but it will keep him moving long after the universe forgets his name. Because even for a man who has seen everything, love remains the one mystery he can't destroy. Regret is the gravity that keeps Rick Sanchez from floating away. It's what pulls him back down when the universe gets too wide, when the laughter gets too loud, when the numbness starts to feel like peace. For all his travels and all his escapes, regret is the one place he always returns to. It's home in the worst and most familiar sense, built from all the moments he can't undo, all the people he couldn't save, all the versions of himself he failed to become. He hides it well. To most, Rick looks untouchable. Every mistake is brushed off with a joke, every failure repackaged as inevitability, but behind the sarcasm is exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much memory for too long. Regret doesn't disappear when you can rewrite time. It multiplies. Each new timeline, each new universe, each fix creates more consequences to regret. He's tried to outsmart it, to erase it, to edit it out of his life, like a flaw in the formula. But regret isn't in the festate, events, it's in the awareness. And awareness, for Rick, is eternal. His regret doesn't shout, it whispers. It hides in the way he pauses before a cruel joke, in the silence that follows laughter, in the way his hand shakes when he reaches for another drink. He doesn't cry, he recalculates. Every emotion is translated into data, every wound into a hypothesis. But logic doesn't heal what it can't measure. Regret is not a problem to solve, it's a mirror to face. And Rick, for all his brilliance, is terrified of mirrors. He regrets more than he'll ever admit. He regrets the things he did, but he regrets the things he didn't do more. The apologies he never gave. The moments of love he avoided because they felt too dangerous. The people he hurt because he couldn't stand being seen as weak. He tells himself it's all meaningless, that everyone dies, that nothing lasts. But meaning doesn't need to last to hurt. It just needs to exist long enough to leave a mark. And Rick, despite his denial, is covered in them. Every time he looks at Morty, he feels the echo of every version of Morty he's lost. The ones left behind, the ones broken by his choices, the ones who finally walked away. He doesn't talk about them, but they're there, layered beneath his words like static. Morty doesn't know it, but every time Rick saves him, he's trying to rewrite every failure that came before. It never works. Each rescue only deepens the guilt, because he knows it's not selfless, it's penance. Beth is another kind of regret, not for what he's done, but for what he didn't do. The years he wasn't there, the lessons he never taught, the love he never showed. He watches her carry the same flaws he hates in himself, the same perfectionism, the same fear of inadequacy, the same desperate need to control what can't be controlled. She learned those things from his absence. And every time he sees her struggling with them, he feels the weight of his own reflection pressing down. He created the problem by trying to avoid it. There's a special cruelty in regret when you can't die. For mortals, regret fades with time or ends with death. For Rick, it compounds. It's cumulative. Every new universe adds another layer. He remembers everything, not because he wants to, but because he can't forget. His brain, built for infinite knowledge, never stops replaying the moments that broke him. There's no mercy in that kind of memory. It's not nostalgia, it's repetition. A punishment he can't escape because he designed it himself. Sometimes he tries to turn regret into energy. He tells himself that guilt is fuel, that every mistake teaches, every loss instructs. It's how he justifies survival. But learning doesn't always mean healing. Sometimes it just means remembering in more detail. He knows exactly why he hurts, how he became this way, what choices led him here. But understanding the cause doesn't change the effect. Awareness without forgiveness is torture, and Rick is too proud to forgive himself. He mocks the idea of redemption, calls it sentimental nonsense. But there are moments when he acts like he believes in it, when he saves a stranger, when he comforts Morty instead of mocking him, when he chooses restraint over revenge. These are small acts, almost imperceptible, but they're the closest he ever gets to self-forgiveness. He'll never say it out loud, but each time he does something right, there's a quiet voice inside that whispers, maybe it's not too late. He ignores it, of course, but the voice always returns. Rick's regret also manifests as restlessness. He can't stay still because stillness invites reflection, and reflection invites pain. Every trip to another dimension, every reckless experiment, every impulsive act is a way to stay ahead of his own thoughts. Movement is his form of anesthesia. As long as he's running, regret can't catch him. But it always does. It waits. It doesn't chase. It knows he'll come back. What makes his regret unbearable is that it's rooted in love. If he truly didn't care, there would be no regret. But he does care, deeply, endlessly, in ways he can't articulate. The very existence of his guilt is proof of his humanity. And maybe that's what he hates most about it, that it keeps him human. Every act of remorse reminds him that no matter how godlike his mind becomes, he can't escape feeling. In his darkest hours, when he lets the mask fall completely, Rick sometimes wonders what forgiveness would even look like. Could he forgive himself? Could he accept that he's done harm without letting that harm define him? Could he live without needing to punish himself? The thought feels impossible. He's built his entire identity on being irredeemable. Without guilt, who would he be? But somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of cynicism and intellect, there's a flicker, not of hope, but of possibility. The idea that maybe regret isn't meant to be erased or solved. Maybe it's meant to be carried, not as punishment, but as memory. A reminder of who he's been and who he could still be. Regret, after all, is love in disguise. The pain of having cared. The proof that something once mattered enough to miss. And maybe that's the quiet redemption Rick will never name. That he still feels regret at all. That after everything he's destroyed, he can still look back and wish he hadn't. That somewhere, in the endless corridors of his mind, he still believes he could have done better. Regret doesn't make him weak. It makes him alive. It means there's still something inside him that remembers goodness, even if he doesn't believe in it anymore. When the night grows heavy and the bottles are empty, Rick sometimes sits with his regret instead of running from it. He doesn't analyze it, doesn't mock it, doesn't try to fix it. He just lets it be. The ache, the memory, the impossible wish. And in that stillness, something softens. Not forgiveness, not peace, just quiet understanding. That maybe the weight he carries isn't meant to crush him. Maybe it's meant to keep him grounded. Because if despair is the architecture he lives in, and control is the illusion that sustains him, then regret is the gravity that keeps him human. And in a universe where gods are lonely and mortals are temporary, being human, even painfully, imperfectly, might be the closest thing Rick Sanchez has left to grace. Existence, to Rick Sanchez, has always been a joke told without a punchline. It's a noise, a blur of atoms pretending to mean something. He's seen its mechanics too clearly to be deceived by its theatre, the birth, the struggle, the love, the loss, the repetition. To most, these things are sacred. To Rick, they're predictable. Patterns wrapped in sentiment, equations pretending to be poetry. He laughs at them not because they're funny, but because laughter is the only sound that fits between knowing and despair. He understands the universe better than anyone alive. He's seen its edges and found nothing beyond them. No God, no truth, no purpose. Just infinite versions of the same mistake. Consciousness trying to justify itself. Existence, he realizes, is absurd because it keeps happening despite knowing it's meaningless. It's not tragedy or comedy. It's both, endlessly folding into each other. And for someone who can't stop thinking, can't stop analysing, can't stop feeling despite it all, that absurdity becomes unbearable. Most people cope with absurdity by choosing sides. Some build faith around it. Others build delusion. Rick builds machines. His inventions are his prayers, not to something higher, but to the possibility that something could still surprise him. Every portal, every experiment, every reckless adventure is an act of defiance against absurdity. He's not searching for meaning, he's daring the universe to prove him wrong. And every time it doesn't, he drinks. The absurdity of existence isn't just cosmic for Rick, it's personal. It's in the contradiction of being the smartest man alive and still unable to find peace. It's in the way he can rewrite reality, but not his own emotions. It's in the loop of destroying what he loves to prove he doesn't need it, and then missing it anyway. The same pattern plays out across dimensions, and each time he recognizes it, the irony cuts deeper. Awareness, for Rick, doesn't bring liberation, it brings paralysis. He's not the first to notice life's absurdity, but he might be the first to map it in equations. To prove, mathematically, that existence resists reason. But knowledge doesn't shield him from the ache, it makes it worse. Because to see absurdity and still feel pain is to live without anesthesia. Every attempt to mock it, every cynical speech, every outburst of cruelty is a way to numb that pain, a way to prove he's still smarter than the joke. But sometimes, in his quieter hours, he wonders if the joke is smarter than him. There's a peculiar tenderness in how he faces absurdity. For all his mockery, Rick never truly turns away from life. He still shows up, still moves, still creates. If existence is a joke, then participation is an act of courage. Maybe he laughs not to avoid despair, but to keep himself from surrendering to it completely. His laughter, sharp and slurred and bitter, is its own kind of prayer, one that says, I see it all, and I'm still here. Absurdity has another side, one Rick rarely admits, freedom. If nothing matters, then everything is allowed. You can love without reason, act without justification, exist without approval. For a moment, that thought liberates him. He could be anyone, anywhere, at any time. But the freedom doesn't last. Freedom without meaning turns hollow. Every universe becomes the same. Every choice feels pre-written. He keeps waiting for something, anything, to surprise him, but the absurdity always wins. It's too perfect in its emptiness. Sometimes Rick wonders if the absurd isn't the enemy, if maybe it's the point that life isn't supposed to make sense. That meaning, if it existed, would ruin the beauty of it. He'd never admit that out loud, of course, but the thought lingers in him like a quiet rebellion. Because if life is truly absurd, then there's no wrong way to live it. There's no mistake in existing, no failure in feeling. Even despair, even regret, even the endless cycle of his own mistakes, they all belong. The absurd makes everything permissible. He has moments of revelation, fleeting and fragile. Like when he looks at Morty and realizes that, despite all the pain, he's glad the boy exists. Or when he watches a sunrise on a dying planet and feels awe despite knowing exactly how light refraction works. Or when he hears laughter, his family's laughter, and, for a brief second, forgets to deconstruct it. In those moments, he stops fighting absurdity and starts participating in it. He becomes part of the joke instead of the audience. And maybe that's where meaning hides, not in explanation, but in experience. Rick's entire philosophy dances around one paradox. If existence is absurd, then living well is an act of defiance. The universe doesn't care, but he does, and that difference matters. He tries to convince himself it doesn't, but his actions betray him. Every time he risks himself for someone else, every time he rebuilds what he's destroyed, every time he chooses to stay instead of vanish, he contradicts his own nihilism. He can't help it. He's human enough to keep trying, even after proving there's no point. There's a quiet beauty in that contradiction. Because maybe absurdity isn't a curse. Maybe it's the only thing keeping him alive. If existence had meaning, he'd dissect it until it stopped being beautiful. But because it doesn't, he can keep searching forever. The lack of purpose becomes purpose. The joke becomes the story. The absurd keeps him moving when hope can't. It gives him something to rebel against. And rebellion, for Rick Sanchez, has always been the closest thing to faith. He doesn't believe in gods, but he believes in persistence, in motion, in laughter that refuses to die, even when it has nothing to laugh at. Maybe that's what the absurd really teaches him, that there's a strange holiness to futility. That continuing, anyway, despite knowing better, is its own form of creation. The scientist in him can't call it spiritual, but the human in him feels it all the same. At night, when the lab is silent and his thoughts start circling like dying stars, Rick sometimes lets himself feel the full weight of it, the absurdity of existing, of still breathing, of still caring despite every reason not to. He feels it like gravity, pressing on his chest, and then, against all logic, he laughs. Not the bitter laugh of mockery, but something gentler, something that sounds almost like acceptance. Because maybe the joke isn't on him. Maybe it never was. Maybe the universe, in all its indifference, isn't laughing at him but with him, the sound of chaos recognizing itself in consciousness. The absurd, after all, isn't the opposite of meaning. It's the space where meaning grows. And for Rick Sanchez, that realization, that tiny ridiculous piece, might be the closest thing to enlightenment he'll ever find. Redemption, for Rick Sanchez, was never supposed to be part of the story. It doesn't fit the equations. It doesn't make sense within the physics of who he is. There's no logic that leads from chaos to grace, no formula that transforms guilt into peace. Redemption, to him, is sentimental fiction, a bedtime story for people who still believe in happy endings. And yet, as the universes he's ruined continue spinning, as the people he's pushed away continue forgiving him in small, impossible ways, something inside him begins to shift, slowly, quietly, against his will. It starts not with grand acts, but with stillness. A moment here, a hesitation there. The way he pauses before a cruel remark, the way he chooses to listen instead of argue, the way his hand trembles before pulling a trigger he doesn't need to pull. None of these things make him good. Not really, they just make him aware. And awareness, for Rick, is where all change begins. He's spent lifetimes mastering everything but himself, yet now, in his exhaustion, he begins to turn inward. He begins to wonder if maybe the smallest victories matter more than the biggest revelations. For most of his life, redemption meant reversal, undoing what was done, fixing the unfixable, erasing the pain. But he's learned that time doesn't allow that, not even for him. The past doesn't need correction, it needs acknowledgement. And that, more than any scientific discovery, terrifies him. To face what he's done without trying to rewrite it. To sit with it and say, yes, that happened, and I was there. For a man who spent years pretending to be untouchable, That honesty feels like dissection, but it's the first real thing he's done in a long time. The quiet redemption begins where arrogance fails, where laughter fades, where genius can't help. It begins in the space between the bottle and the next idea, in the silence he used to drown. It doesn't arrive like forgiveness or revelation. It arrives like fatigue, a weariness so deep it strips away the pretense. For the first time, he doesn't want to be the smartest or the strongest or the survivor. He just wants to stop running. He'll never admit it, but he's tired of being right. The truth, for all its precision, never brought him peace. It just gave his pain a name. Maybe peace isn't in knowing everything. Maybe it's in letting some things remain unanswered. Maybe redemption isn't the reward for understanding, but the surrender that comes after. Rick doesn't know how to pray, but in his own way, he begins to. Each act of restraint, each apology that almost forms, each small mercy, they're all pieces of a language he's learning too late. The universe doesn't notice. It doesn't care. Redemption, if it exists, is quiet because it has no audience. It's not something you prove, it's something you live. Rick doesn't change dramatically. He still drinks. He still argues. He still sabotages himself more often than not. But beneath it all, there's a shift, subtle, invisible to anyone but him. A moment of pause before cruelty. A trace of care in the way he repairs something he didn't break. The kind of redemption that doesn't erase the past, but carries it gently. He begins to see that redemption isn't about balance, it's about presence. About staying when it would be easier to leave. About facing the people he's hurt without turning the encounter into a speech. It's not a transformation, it's endurance. The courage to keep existing without armor. The humility to be wrong and still show up anyway. In that way, Rick's redemption is less like a victory and more like gravity. It doesn't lift him, it holds him in place. Morty, without realizing it, becomes his teacher, not through wisdom, but through persistence. Every time Morty forgives him, every time he still looks at Rick with some fragment of faith, it chips away at the wall Rick built around his heart. He wants to reject it, to call it naive, but he can't. Because Morty's forgiveness isn't ignorance, it's choice. A choice Rick can't comprehend, but can't ignore. It's proof that maybe the universe isn't as cruel as he decided it was. That maybe kindness, however illogical, is still real. There's a moment, small, forgettable to anyone else, when Rick finally lets himself believe that it might be a shared laugh over something stupid. It might be a wordless glance that doesn't need translation. In that instant, the weight he's carried for so long shifts, not because it's gone, but because he's stopped fighting it. Regret becomes memory. Memory becomes story. Story becomes survival. Redemption doesn't rewrite him. It reframes him. He's still the man who's done unforgivable things. He's still the cynic, the genius, the wanderer. But he's also something else now. The witness. The one who sees the world as it is, and still chooses to stay in it. That choice, however small, is everything. Because it's the first thing he's done that isn't about control or escape or defiance. It's about participation, about being part of life instead of standing above it. He'll never announce it. There's no speech, no revelation, no cosmic epiphany, just a slow unwinding of the need to be right, the need to be untouchable. Redemption, for Rick Sanchez, isn't a fire that burns away sin. It's the quiet warmth that follows when you stop lighting new fires. It's the silence that doesn't feel empty anymore. It's laughter that doesn't come from mockery, but from recognition. In time, he learns that the universe doesn't forgive or condemn. It just continues. It doesn't need him to be good. It only asks him to exist honestly. And that, for a man who's spent eternity lying to himself, is redemption enough. To be honest, to be flawed, to be here. One night, Rick stands outside his lab, watching. The stars shift. He doesn't name them, doesn't analyze their light. He just watches. Morty's asleep, somewhere inside, dreaming of things Rick can't understand. The world hums softly, unaware of his revelation. He breathes in, and for the first time in longer than he can remember, the breath doesn't hurt. It just is. Maybe that's all redemption ever needed to be. Not an ending, but a quiet alignment between the mind that doubts and the heart that endures. The peace that comes when the war between them finally pauses. The understanding that even a man who's broken the laws of time can still learn how to live within it. Rick doesn't smile, but the stillness in his face is close enough. The night moves on. The stars keep burning, and for once, he doesn't feel smaller than them. He just feels part of them. The smartest man in the universe, humbled by the simplest truth, that even chaos, in its endless noise, can find a rhythm. And in that rhythm, somewhere between regret and acceptance, between laughter and silence, Rick Sanchez finds something that almost feels like peace.